Welcome to another Unmuted with Marsha. You know, it is Supreme Court season. We at the Senate Judiciary Committee are going to have hearings, and we will be going through the vetting process with Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, who has been nominated for the Supreme Court. And so we thought it would be so appropriate to talk about this process. And one of my favorite people, Professor John Yoo. And you're going to find him at UC Berkeley if you're wanting to follow.
Believe it or not.
And he has such a great background. He was born in Seoul, South Korea. He had clerked with Justice Clarence Thomas. So you really have your conservative bona fides there. He served as general counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and you were in law school with Justice Kavanaugh.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You're right.
That is right.
You've done your research.
Well, I have done my research, but I think that our unmuted audience would enjoy knowing all of that and knowing of your ties to the court and to the business of the court, because this is something that the American people depend on to be fair and impartial. And you know, many times we talk about the federal bench and the district courts, the appellate courts, and then those appellate judges end up being elevated, many of them, to the Supreme Court. So as our audience, as they tune in next week and they begin to learn about this process, and they're looking at federal judges, what do you look to, what do you want to see when you are looking at a judge? What makes somebody a really good judge?
Well, Senator, thanks for having me back.
Sure.
And thanks for your leadership on a lot of the fights on the floor of the Senate these days. It's much appreciated even by those of us in California who can't vote for you.
Right.
I think the most important thing we want to learn from the hearings from any justice appointed by a Democrat or Republican is how they interpret the Constitution. They could give you answers yes or no on how they might vote on, say, abortion or gun rights, but they're going to hear lots of other issues too that affect all of our daily lives. Cases like affirmative action, religion in public life, the power of the federal government, on and on and on. The best way, I think, to get a feel for the justice, and you have to vote on her confirmation, is, I would say, do they believe the meaning of the Constitution changes along with everyday, our contemporary norms, or do we interpret the Constitution based on the understanding of the founders? I think that's really the key thing to get to. And that's how I would choose the justices I like versus the justices who I disagree with, is based on that answer to that question.
And when people talk about being a constitutionalist or a textualist, talk a little bit about what that actually means and what people are going to find in a judge who is a constitutionalist.
Yeah, it's a great question. A constitutionalist is usually somebody, I think like you, who does say, we interpret the Constitution, we start with the text informed by what the people who wrote it back in 1787 to 1788 thought those words meant. Because otherwise, if the meaning of the words can just change based on what we think it means now, then the Constitution isn't really advancing those principles set by founders, and it's not limiting our government today. So take, for example, when it says we have the right to bear arms. Right? Does it mean arms as they're understood now, or is it arms as it was understood at that time, a personal firearm? A lot of, I would say, progressives want to be able to play with the words because that gives the government a lot more power to regulate our daily lives.
And playing with the words really leads to judicial activism. Why is that a bad thing?
Well, one, if the judges are just playing with the words, stretching their terms, that gives the judge himself or herself the ability to import their own views. So it's not the views of George Washington or Alexander Hamilton or James Madison. It becomes the views of Justice Jackson or Justice Sotomayor or even a Justice Thomas. And while they might be smart men and women and highly educated, it's not their job, right, to say this is what I think the best policy is. That's actually your job or the president's job, and we elect you, and we can, remove you from office if you lose touch with the people. But if a justice says, I'm going to do this because I just think it's a great idea, even if the constitutional text doesn't permit it, there's no way you or I can do anything about it because they're there for life, and there's only 9 of them. And so it creates the possibility of this concentration of power in just a few people, which our founders designed our whole Constitution to prevent.
That is so true, they did. And, Congress is to make the laws. The executive branch is to implement the laws. And then you have that interpretation that comes from the court, deciding those rights and wrongs and those checks and balances. And to me, knowing somebody's judicial philosophy is a very important part of this, if they've got the humility that is going to be necessary. And I'm sure as you are teaching and working with students, you talk about judicial philosophy. So opine on that for a few minutes, Professor.
We charge the students a lot of money for this.
But I always love to hear you talk.
Well, I have to say, one of the great achievements under President Trump and your time in the Senate, I think, has been appointing 3 justices, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, who are constitutionalists, who, as you described it, see their role as a reserved one where it's Congress that should make the laws, and it's the president who should execute them. We've seen a lot of monkey business played with those simple concepts where Congress is trying to get out of making laws and delegates huge powers to these unaccountable agencies who actually set all kinds of things like water requirements, gas mileage, permitting on federal lands for drilling. Those are not set by Congress anymore. And then the executive branch, particularly starting with President Obama, they've been picking and choosing which laws to enforce, like the immigration laws. President Obama said, I don't feel like enforcing the immigration laws as to 10 million people. That's a big change. And so which branch is going to be left to keep each branch in their proper lane? It's falling more and more on the judiciary. And that's a big burden because they should be conscious that they're kind of anti-democratic, right? There's only 9 of them. They're never elected. They can't really be voted out of office, and they're there for life. So on the one hand, you don't want the justices to be overactive or hyperactive. But I do think we want them to take tough stands to make sure each branch does its constitutional job and restores the balance to our government that I think it's been kind of thrown out of the whack these last 10, 15 years.
Well, I think it has too, and I believe that's why Tennesseans are paying so much attention to who is going on the district court and the appellate court and the Supreme Court. And they want people that have experience, that have actually been a judge. And they say, if you're going to the federal bench, you better know what you're doing. This is not a time for on-the-job training. And they will say, okay, we want somebody who's a constitutionalist that believes in the Constitution as it was written. They want someone that believes in the rule of law. They want people that believe in equal access to the courts and equal justice. Lady Justice, many times I'll have Tennesseans talk about that importance, that weight, that balance, that checks and balances. And they want this to be kind of that spot of last resort. And so they want the fairness that is there.
I was about to mention that the reason people in Tennessee, Californians need the courts more than anybody because our government's so crazy. But if you can't get protected by the governor or by the legislature or by your state judges, the federal bench is the last body that's there to protect your rights. Even when everyone's against you.
That's exactly right, and that's why they want it to be fair. But I want to thank you. I could talk to you all day long. You know that.
You have much more important things to do.
But it's always such an interesting conversation. For those of you that are watching Unmuted, you can keep up with what we're doing through the Supreme Court hearings and the confirmation process. You'll find me at Marsha Blackburn or our website, blackburn.senate.gov. And since John Yoo has decided he's not going to be on social media, you can put his name in your search engine and you can put in UC Berkeley and find out all sorts of great opinions and writings and lectures. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Senator.